Hey Harvey, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for inviting me. I'll be in the road in about 5 minutes and then I'll be jumping in. Is it just you and I, or is it, I would assume a bunch of people?
I think there's more people on the LinkedIn stream. Currently, it's just you and I in the Zoom webinar. But what I'm trying to do, yeah, so we're currently pre-live, and yeah, I'll just be talking, and if you have any questions, just speak up, and we'll just make it a online conversation.
Let's
Is
do
all
it.
what I was thinking. Yeah,
I'll be
let's do
happy
it.
to, and count me in.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot, Harvey. Just a second here while I get this thing spun up. And I saw your TED Talk, by the way.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I hope you liked it.
Yeah, I did. It was definitely very inspiring and kind of brings it around full circle about what this is all about, you know. So very much appreciated.
I agree. It's adding that human factor that we're all worried about, but combining the technology.
Yeah, yep. All right, let me go live here. All right. Good morning, afternoon, night, everybody, from wherever you're coming from. Yeah, thanks again for joining us. We have a special guest on the coffee chat today. The guy's name is Dr. Harvey Castro. I don't think I need to really introduce him, but for those who don't know Dr. Castro, he is a visionary. And he also recently gave a TED Talk recently where he really went into brought it back to home, back to life about what Gen AI is all about. It's about helping patients. It's about making healthcare truly available to all. And I'm definitely honored to have him on the show. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Harvey.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and it's going to be a great talk.
Yeah. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about synthetic data, but I'm going to do a little bit of a different kind of spin to this. So on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, I had attended a advisory committee meeting at the FDA about Gen AI. I had gone there in person. Great series of talks, great comments that were made. I think today I'm going to kind of go over some of my thoughts about that talk and also tying it back to the synthetic data because that was my particular topic that I'd presented in front of the committee and also in front of the FDA. So I'll let me go ahead and share my screen. And definitely people on the stream, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into either the LinkedIn question box, or if you're on the Zoom chat, you can either raise your hand or go ahead and just type into the chat. And I'll try to answer any questions as they come in. And also, Harvey, if you have any questions, comments, whatever it is, just kind of feel free to barge in and just let me know. I would love to
Awesome.
hear your comments as well. I think this is very interesting because as you guys probably know already, yeah, Harvey is on the front line of Gen AI usage inside medicine, and this topic is very timely right now as well. So I would love to hear what you got to say, Harvey. So let me share my screen here. So I haven't really had time to really prep too much about this, but I'll kind of give you guys my preliminary thoughts on this topic. So, first the night started out with I just had to say bye to my son. It was hard to leave him behind, but use that, and then started the night with some really good dumplings. Those are really good. So on, so I just want to go in the topic about what the advisory committee meeting looks like and kind of what the format is. So this was the first time that I had gone to one of these. So basically, the advisory committee, FDA invites speakers both from the public and also speakers that are part of the committee to attend. And they're trying to get the public's perception, public's concerns, ideas about a particular topic. And in this case, the topic was about Gen AI. So they had invited people from clinical practice, from research, to give talks, and also sit on the committee. The job of the committee is to assemble all of the thoughts from the public and also create their own thoughts and advise FDA on this particular topic. So it was interesting to see the FDA was mostly in the listening mode in this case, in that they were listening to what the advisory committee and what the public had to say. So really, this was the opportunity for our voice to be heard. there was a lot of FDA staff also sitting in the room. And again, they were mostly in listening mode. And then there was a public that was allowed to also participate in that room. So yeah, that was kind of format of the meeting. On the first day, the FDA commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf, had said something really interesting, where he said that he thinks there's a lot of good reason for healthcare systems to be concerned that if they don't step up, that they're going to end up holding the bag on liability when these algorithms go wrong. My takeaway from this is that currently Gen AI is being used across several healthcare systems. It has clear and true benefit, but because it's not being FDA regulated, or currently I think a lot of technologies are not in FDA's oversight, that the healthcare systems kind of have to self-regulate right now. And where these algorithms go wrong, there isn't like an FDA clearance that they could really fall back on. That liability really is going to be on them. And this concept of like the decentralized governance, Gen AI, came up a lot, not just in the advisory committee comments, but also in like the general public. And when I was talking to the folks there, that concept also came up a lot. I think it comes from the fact that Gen AI has clear benefits. And if you put yourself in the shoe of FDA, you can understand like it takes time to really assemble all these things and create a general purpose framework in order to regulate this technology. But of course, that takes time. And currently, I think the healthcare industry has kind of decided that hey, this Gen AI is worth taking this into the clinic carefully, but taking it into the clinic perhaps before FDA has a chance to really set their guidance on this topic. On this topic from the crowd, there's several schools of thought that come up. One was that the FDA should not regulate this technology, and that the burden of proof should fall on the local healthcare institution policy level. And I think what the sentiment here is that ChatGPT and also related technologies shouldn't really be seen any different than like a Google search, which obviously everyone knows that like a Google search is not regulated by FDA, but clearly is being used in the clinic to drive the healthcare process there. One other interesting idea was that there should be some licensing body, that if you are a physician using Gen AI, you should get some sort of license in order to use it. Just like there are certain drugs where where like a cardiologist needs to participate in like a licensing test or some sort of training in order to properly be certified to use that medication. And then on the other side of the gamut, some folks thought that software only products should not be regulated by FDA at all as well. I tend to kind of fall somewhere in the middle of most policy decisions here, where I understand where FDA is coming from, and I understand also where the overall healthcare industry is coming from. Now, I'd be curious, Harvey, like, what do you think about this, kind of based on what you've seen here? On the one end, this should be regulated. Stop. Let's not use it until it is. And then on the other hand, hey, let's just let the market figure it out. And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your time. Thanks for going to the FDA. And I really enjoy your work, and I appreciate all that you do for us physicians and this space of AI in healthcare. So first of all, thank you. Second, as far as my thoughts, my favorite phrase for the year is, we don't know what we don't know, but AI is here to help us understand more. And with that statement, I fear that on one side, if there isn't some kind of education or guidance, that if we just let the hospital systems regulate themselves, they don't know what to ask. They don't know about data drift. They don't know, they may not have the IT infrastructure to support these algorithms to fully understand them to the point where they're self-regulating them. With that said, can it be done? Yes. Can it be taught? Yes. Can the right people be in the right positions to make those decisions in-house and evaluate the tool? Yes. Should we increase the vendor responsibility of what should be disclaimed. Kind of like my favorite phrase is, we all have nutrition labels that when we go to the grocery store, we're going through and saying, okay, I should eat this, maybe I shouldn't eat that. And oh, I didn't know I had this much salt in this thing. Same thing with our AIs. If I'm using AI type 1 and I'm using it in Europe, but I'm using it with the data specific to New York City, will that algorithm work? And so we need to educate ourselves in this type of knowledge so that we can really integrate. Now, on the regulatory bodies, I'm biased in that I feel that we should obviously we should always keep HIPAA and our patients' privacy at the highest standard, but I want to make sure that it's a fine balance, that we're not holding back from possible cures or possible things that will help our healthcare system because we're over regulating. So it is a fine balance.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, Dr. Castro. I think you definitely touched on a lot of concepts there, and kind of let me expand on some of those and kind of unpack them. So you mentioned the nutrition label concept from the Gen AI providers, and I really like that analogy because it's almost, like you should know what you're eating, right? And some of the similar topics were brought up during the discussions there. Like there was a concept of what's called a model card. I think that's kind of the machine learning speak of what you're calling a nutrition label, where that model card says what this foundation model was trained on, what are some potential biases there, and has like an intended use, especially if that foundation model has been post-trained. That, is it like is it trained to take on instructions, Q&A? Is it trained for some other purpose? But having that model card and also educating providers on, how to potentially consume that card, I think is really important. You also mentioned that the hospital systems may not know the best practices in order to self-regulate. I also agree that that is an issue. I really enjoyed FDA's good machine learning practice guidance that they came out. And it's almost like a 10 commandments of like good machine learning practice, where they had 10 points. And it was a single page. And it was really easy to understand. You could consume it in like 5 minutes. I think we need something like that for the hospital systems. Probably in the meantime, while we wait for FDA to figure out what are some more detailed guidances, perhaps something like that would kind of bridge the gap there. And also, you'd mentioned that, yeah, fine balance between it's definitely a balance between risk versus benefit, right? Like the risk of harm versus the benefit of the technology. And also, we need to keep in mind that the risk of not releasing innovation when it should be released, that is also a patient risk that needs to be considered. For example, sometimes you have a drug trial where the drug performs so well that it is unethical to continue the trial, right? So that should also be considered here. Very difficult questions to really understand, to unpack, about like what is the risk versus benefit, especially how do you do that in the pre-market. So this is kind of another theme that has come up here. The risk versus benefit equation, it's impossible to know without putting it out to test, right? So kind of going back to the drug trial analogy, a phase 1 drug trial is done on a very limited population just to assess toxicity. You can only do so much in like animal models. You can only do so much in like computational modeling. At some point, you have to put it out there in a limited subset and test, right? And like I think as a society, like the risk tolerance needs to be kind of understood. Like, what is that risk tolerance? And I think it varies based on society to society, right? So yeah, I totally agree. Like all these are really top of mind concepts, and they were touched upon during the meeting. So yeah, let me move on to, or let me kind of take a step back, like why the FDA began regulating medical devices. My understanding, this happened because these devices became more complicated in that they weren't just scalpels and like sutures anymore, but they became more complicated that the average clinician could not ascertain if they worked properly because they got so complicated. And so FDA stepped in and say we have to protect the public and require the manufacturers to do some pre-market validation in order to prove that these devices are safe and effective. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So, hey, Harvey, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, for some reason I
All right.
got kicked out
No
for a
worries.
second, but I'm back.
All right. Yeah. Anything you wanted to follow up on and kind of the previous? I just kind of expanded on some of the.
Yeah.
And I'll
No, no,
I'll try to put them together. Yep. Good.
no, I heard it, and I'm sure the audience has the same questions of the Ten Commandments. Can you read them or share them or share some of them, or just to kind of give us
Yeah.
an idea?
Sure. Let me pull them up so we can
And
do
then
these
as
on
you're
the
pulling,
call.
and as you pull them up, my other question of when you do share the Ten Commandments, what is your take on the Ten Commandments, just in general? If there's any one that you're like, "Ooh, I like this," or "I'm not sure about this one," just to add to the
Yeah.
conversation.
Sure. Yeah, so they're called these guiding principles. This is the good machine learning practice for medical device development. This was released October 2021, which in like the machine learning space, this was a really long time ago. But I think they still hold true even in the Gen AI era. And there's a couple more that I would add to this list, specifically for Gen AI, mainly like the like anti-hallucination techniques. But anyway, so some of these guiding principles. Number one, multidisciplinary expertise is leveraged throughout the TPLC, and the total product life cycle also came up a lot during the meetings. Well, so this is saying that you can't just create these in a vacuum. Like you need expertise from the medical side, from the technical side, regulatory side. Well, good software engineering practices are implemented. Yet sometimes it's like easy to forget that machine learning is it needs to be deployed, and there's a lot of overlap between software engineering principles and good machine learning principles. Clinical study participants and data sets are representative of the intended population, and this kind of goes back to the labeling requirements that you were talking about, Harvey, where you should be testing your device for what you intend on it being used on. Training sets are independent of test sets. This is this is definitely a very important thing, especially for Gen AI and foundation models. Kind of taking a little bit of step back on like the terminology, which I think is important. A generative AI is is defined as something that produces new data that wasn't part of the training data. It usually uses a foundation model as the driving engine, and the foundation model is something that is trained on a vast quantity of data that is almost internet scale data. So this commandment always holds true, that your training data should be independent of tests. Because if it's not, then you will get a performance number that is higher than what it actually is, because your machine learning model is just going to be remembering the training set instead of actually doing what you want. So in the age of foundation models, you have to be careful that your training set doesn't leak onto the internet or somehow gets ingested into the foundation model training. Otherwise, this is a commonly known fact that the public leaderboards on some of these benchmarks have already been contaminated, and that the ChatGPT is already trained on them, so it performs better than it actually does in practice. Yeah, so I'm not going to go over all of these in detail, but maybe just to see which ones I think are like the most important. I think definitely number 4, training test data is going to be separate. Focus is placed on the performance of the human AI team. I think that's also really important. And that the AI, like you see these benchmarks on like human plus AI is sometimes better or worse than AI alone. I think those are academically interesting, but in practice, the AI needs to augment the human, and that's a learning process from both sides. Right? Like the humans need to understand how to properly use AI to augment the weaknesses of humans. Like we can't remember the vast quantities of data that like ChatGPT can, and vice versa, AI should be used with the human strengths and weaknesses in mind. And also this one here, number 10, was a common theme during the meeting today, which I believe will be a much more important thing for like the upcoming FDA regulation on this. Deployed models are monitored for performance And really, this is saying that we don't know in the pre-market, we can't be absolutely sure what the performance looks like there. We have to put it out there and we have to monitor this in the post-market, in the field, in a real world setting. And that's the way that we will really get to understanding what are the failure modes, how to manage those failure modes. And we have to do so in a way where we manage the risk to the public as well, but also understanding that the risks are there. Kind of think of this like, oh, sorry, Harvey, go ahead.
No, but nobody. I was just gonna unpack a couple of things for people listening. There's different ways of analyzing the different AI models, and flavors is what I call them. And to what he said is, imagine being given a standardized test, but these AI models have already seen the test and already see the answer key, and they're not really processing, they're just regurgitating something that it saw. And so in order to make sure that these comparing apples with apples and making sure that they truly are doing function A, function B, they have to be shown information that they've never seen. And that is the test that he's talking about. Deploying these things in the real world and seeing, well, how do they command? Do they do what we think they're going to do? Or was the data set in such a way that it's not really doing anything other than just regurgitating some information, and it's not really doing the machine learning that we were hoping. The other thing I wanted to say is, when it comes to this field, this information, the technology is exponential, and our organizations are at best logarithmic. And so when these exponential curves of AI growing so quickly in technology and our organizations going logarithmic, creates a gap. And when that gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger, there becomes a cry from the institution or from the public to do something. And so that's why the FDA is doing these kind of things, because it's getting too much that we need to figure out how to move forward. So I just wanted to interject. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Harvey. I certainly like that a lot. Like the tech is exponential, or the organizations are at best logarithmic. I'm gonna use that if you don't mind.
No, that's part of my talk. That's what I hear you say.
That's awesome. Yeah, so kind of tying it back to this topic I was talking about earlier, like why did FDA begin to regulate medical devices? It's this gap in understanding, and kind of just as Dr. Castro said, the technology is exponential, the complexity is exponential, but the ability to understand those technologies is increasing at a logarithmic level. And so that gap there presents risk, right? Like if you have a physician that is using ChatGPT, 3.5, and they're using it similar to Google, that's because there is that knowledge gap there. And the thesis of FDA regulating these devices is that it's too risky to let the free market have a feedback loop, where the feedback loop is patient harm, right? That's too risky. So we need to do something before that feedback loop can start to ensure that the risk to the public is managed. But the risks are still there. You can never have a risk-free system, or else we won't have any sort of devices on the market at all. Sorry to take one more aside, but it kind of goes back to, or it goes back to like the FAA and like how they probably regulate airplanes, right? Like at some point you have to release the airplane to the public so the public can benefit from it, but it's not without risk. We will have incidents, and we will, in the post-market feedback, we will find those incidents, fix them, and now air travel is one of the safest ways per mile per hour that you can travel. So I think a similar concept here, Gen AI being an airplane, and we say, oh, well, when is it ready? When do we as a society feel ready that it is ready to launch? And we know that there are going to be adverse events related from this, but the benefit worth the risk. And at this advisory committee meeting and others that be like it, I think this is where the public and FDA are calibrating on like what is the risk tolerance that we want to accept there. So I'm going to go into some specific talks and some specific topics that really resonated with me. All the presenters and all the talks I think were fantastic. There were a couple that I had kind of personally taken some more information from, just because my knowledge gap. So that's why I'm presenting these here. The first one was from FDA, from the research arm of FDA. And what I found really interesting there is that FDA has been doing a lot of homework on doing deep dives into into this new technology. I really like that they brought out how these foundation models will be tested. There's what's called expert evaluation. It's kind of the pre-generative AI. Most of those algorithms are done in this way, where you use a human expert and you show that you have parity with that human expert. But moving a little forward, there's this new paradigm, I think, called model-based evaluation, where my interpretation of this is it could be going more onto like the automated type approach, where we maybe still have humans in the loop to validate these models working appropriately, but it's less human oversight. And perhaps you have things where you could potentially have LLMs that can try to validate other LLMs, and you have like almost AI agent type workflows. This is not what FDA is suggesting, by the way, to do. This is just my personal opinion, is like where this kind of technology could go in the future. So yeah, I think that was an interesting talk from the FDA research division there about this. And again, here they mentioned kind of 4 key takeaways from that call. For Gen AI, known evaluation strategies may apply, where especially if you have applications where the outputs are very well constrained and you have one key intended use for that algorithm, can potentially leverage some of the existing valuation strategies to that. Also, this last point here came up a lot, where pre and post market elements should be emphasized, and post market being kind of the new kid on the block, where it's been talked a lot about before, but I think this time is kind of the main focus versus the pre-market, because it's shown that it's potentially that in the pre-market we're not going to be able to test enough to really know how it's going to perform. So I found that to be interesting. Some other talk I found to be interesting was by Dr. Faisal Mahmood. So Dr. Mahmood brought up his current research at Harvard for using foundation models in pathology. And I found this slide to be extremely telling, in that you can see here that the foundation model-based approach, which I would consider this as kind of the newer crop of algorithms, Gen AI, whereas the previous ones here, like you have ResNet, which is the previous non-Gen AI, you can see such a stark difference in this radar plot in this model's performance across various tasks inside of pathology. So in the pink line here, you can just see just how much more area there is, how generalist of this model can outperform all of these in the prior state of the art. I think this is just incredible. And some of the other talks kind of go into more details about that too. I also thought this concept of, Harvey, did you have any comments on the previous ones here? Sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. But, definitely.
No, I love it. No. It's the beauty of this is it takes a village for all of us to understand. It takes all of us to learn. Nobody really knows all of this, so I'm learning as well. I did want to add, just from just to add to the conversation and just to make it fun. I did the concept I always say is like, damn if I do, damn if I don't, in the sense that if I use AI, I could be legally in issues if I don't use it. And then if I don't use it, I could be in legal issues. And so that's where we're at. And so just to kind of bring it home, I'm an ER doctor. Some of my colleagues have this I call it cool idea gadget. And I'm not promoting their company name, but the skinny is any patient can go into the emergency room. Let's pretend they have a head bleed. And the AI will analyze the CAT scan in real time and text the radiologist and the ER doctor to tell them, hey, this person's having a bleed, so that it bumps the chart at the top of the rack so that radiologists can read it. But then simultaneously, the ER doctor, the team starts jumping in. And the reason I like that example is someone across the street that may not have it, I could see that being an issue in the future where lawyer says, hey, the standard of care should be hospital A, but your hospital across the street does not have this, and my client now did not get the appropriate treatment, and we are suing you. And so that's where I'm like, man, this is going to be an issue. The second thing I want to say is that the AMA has been pushing since last year that hospital systems need to include doctors in that they need to be part of the loop in the decision matrix of should we bring in this type of AI, product A, product B, because often if I work for hospital A, I just show up to work and they're like, here you go, here's their tools, and I don't have any say in it. I just assume the liability to the point where if I use it wrongly, at the end of the day, it's my license. So I just kind of want to throw that little curve.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's certainly a perspective that I don't have much of because I didn't practice, but definitely the legal liability side. I didn't think about the opposite of it is if you have AI that works so well, it is the standard of care, that it could go the other way as well.
Yeah.
Which, like from the outside, seems like a self-corrective mechanism. Obviously, obviously any institution has its flaws, right? But it seems like that could be a self-corrective mechanism to kind of force the adoption of good technology and also kind of hit the brakes on adoption, perhaps, for technology or maybe doing it too soon. Yeah, kind of going back to these topics about Fewshot classification. This is something that I'm really excited about from a technical standpoint. And to clarify what this is, so Fewshot classification is where you take a foundation model that is a generalist model, and zero shot is where you ask it something without giving any examples. So most of the time when you use ChatGPT, most people are using it as a zero shot, where you just ask it, hey, look at this slide and kind of tell me what the kind of pathology is. So that's on the far left of this. But then you can also give it some examples. So you say in your ChatGPT prompt, you can give it some examples. Here's an example of type 1 glomerular nephritis, whatever. And here's one type 2, here's another type 3, and give it some examples. And that's called Fewshot classification. You can see here the performance as you give more examples goes up. And what's really cool about this is this doesn't require any training, any fine tuning. This is not fine tuning. This is just in the prompt. So even with 16 or like 32 cases of zero fine tuning, you can get some very, very high performances, almost like state-of-the-art performances here. And I think the effect this has is it can unlock some workflows that were not possible to automate, or were not economically feasible to automate, either because the healthcare institution doesn't have the technology to do so, or the net ROI is low enough, or it's too low that it doesn't make sense. Now, these micro optimizations are now possible, right? Where you can maybe have a sample size of one, or maybe one particular pathologist wants to do it a certain way, and he or she can assemble a prompt with 16 examples and then use that. And I think that level of micro optimization is what really excites me about this entire topic, actually, Gen AI, is that I don't think it's going to automate away 50% of jobs, but it can definitely streamline 50% of any job because of incredible concepts like this.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Any
I
thoughts on
love
that?
that too. Yeah, I love this topic. It's fascinating. And what's even kind of interesting is the zero shot question that you mentioned, but the fact that if you add a little bit more context, a little bit background, basically think of the AI as downloading the internet twice. And you're asking a question, but you ask it in such a way that the AI doesn't understand what you're really asking. But the fact that it can give you an answer that's pretty close to what you're asking speaks to this. But imagine if you gave it a little bit more context and were able to kind of direct it through your context. So that's the prompt engineering portion. It could be something as simple as guiding it with a little background and then asking the question, and now your yield is that much better. But to your point, Doc, what you're saying is, imagine being able to take very little data instead of downloading the internet twice, like I mentioned, but just downloading maybe what's in your computer and just that small amount of information, and then that being enough to cause enough in a positive output that you're looking for, and it being consistent. And that's what we're talking about. Imagine the different specialties and different niche that we're talking about in medicine, and then using this, training certain amount of data and being able to create applications that literally will save lives or will make a difference. And to end with his part that he said, the 50% comment, we're not here to replace jobs. We're not taking a job. But if you took away 50% of my time to do task A, well, guess what? That gives me 50% more time to spend time with what matters
Exactly.
and having more
Exactly.
that human effect. And not to self-promote my TED Talk, but that was one of my parts in my TED Talk, that we need to let AI do the repetition and let us do the things that matter the most, which are patient care.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that is a key narrative that should be pushed out, is to not view it as a threat, but as an opportunity to increase the human connection, which is sorely lacking in medicine right now. Yeah. And like, I think this concept here, this type of thing is what also really gets me excited about Gen AI, in that now we can have these really customized micro models. You could even imagine that this could be on a per patient level, right? Like it would not be possible to fine tune a model before on a per patient, but with this concept of like a Fewshot prompting, that kind of thing could be possible now. And just a couple of years ago, like you would see graphs like this where people would show the effect of training size to model performance. But these numbers on this x-axis here, like we're going from 1 to 256. But just a couple of years ago, this would be going from 1,000 to 25,000, right? And you'd see the same slowly increasing effect there. And it's just incredible that now we're just shrinking that down to even like down a sample size of 8 with very little effort. There's no amount of programming that anyone needs to do. You just got to use it like ChatGPT. Just type it in. So this is really incredible. It is a democratization of cognitive knowledge to both physicians and to patients. I find it really interesting. Obviously, needs to be kind of constrained to the risk versus benefit needs to be done there. But anyway, let me move on. I'm just going to skip this one. But there are AI agents that are currently automating research and technology. It's really interesting to see that technology being used. I want to go over to Dr. Pranav Rajprakash. He talked about what I think is really important, but is being overshadowed by advancements in the underlying models themselves. But I think this should have probably happened first. If you were asking me like what's like the best way to do it, first we should get an objective function which tells you how good is the output of like a virtual scribe or like ChatGPT. How closely does it map the correct answer? For example, if ChatGPT mistakes left for right, that's a lot worse of an error than just mistaking like small talk or something, right? And that is where this comes into play. The concept of an objective function comes into play, where you can objectively grade how good, how accurate is the output of any particular Gen AI system. And the non-machine or the non-medical grade approaches to this fall short. Like they don't take into account the overall effect of a particular error on the healthcare decision making process. And what Dr. Raj Prakash goes into is new metrics such as the one he presented called RADCRAFT F1. This breaks down the outputs of this text into more of a medical ontology, where you can really understand what is the difference between the correct answer or the human generated answer and the AI generated answer, and have an objective score between the two. If you don't have a score, how do we know it's getting better, right? You don't really have that feedback loop. And by having a score, you can also do a lot of things, like you can subtly change the text where it still means the same thing semantically, but it's worded a different way. That can be used to expand either the training set or expand the test set. There's concern about what if AI runs out of training data? Well, if you had a way to generate more training data in a wide variety of circumstances, but still preserve the the meaning of that data in a
Integrity.
clinical, exactly. But if you still figure out how to do that, right, then you can expand that data set. I think I guess my point here is I think this is kind of an unsung hero of advancing this field forward, especially in the practice of medicine, that we need something like this, where like we need an objective metric to be able to measure this. Any thoughts on that, Harvey?
It sounds like a great transition towards synthetic data.
Yeah, no, that's true. And yeah, as we mentioned, like I actually might not get to it today for stuff, all this other stuff to go over that I found were interesting. Synthetic data has, I think, the potential to solve a couple of problems, and I talked about this to the FDA committee, is that we also need to keep in mind the software developer and like the companies creating this, and that if we ask them to do too much, just by the sheer cost of doing something like an expert read, like we're either going to make these devices significantly way more expensive than they need to be, and or also by net effect, like it's going to go only into the hands of like big tech companies that can really afford that kind of thing. So where I see synthetic data is like it's kind of like the 80-20 principle, where like synthetic data may not be as good as real data, right? It's going to have its own biases. It's going to have other risks associated to it, but it'll be very easy for the software developers to, and when I mean software developer, like I mean the actual company creating the application, they can easily do this. It's cheap, and as the foundation models are getting better, so would the quality of that data being generated as we have more robust metrics, as we discussed before. So will the integrity of that data get better and better? I think it's just a flywheel that will just keep getting better as we go. And what really excites me again with just this, like the concept of this generalist foundation model, is that it'll be really, really easy and cheap for to swap them out. So like you guys probably already have like a library prompt that you use, right? And you can use ChatGPT 4.0, or you can use Claude Sonnet. And as these underlying models get better, you can use the same prompt you had before, and the output of those will get better. So I think something similar with like the concept of using synthetic data is you have a similar thing where you can just swap it out, very little effort, and now you have something that potentially could work better, could capture more of data drift, for example. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of the what got me excited about this topic, and I presented this method, this concept of potentially using synthetic data generation and also fully automated ground truthing, where you generate data on a nightly basis, perhaps use site-specific data in kind of a Fewshot approach that we talked about too. And you would also have a model that can generate the ground truth almost as a human proxy. Of course, it's not going to be as good as using a real human to do it, right? But this entire process can be automated, can be run relatively cheaply, and therefore I think has a higher likelihood of having actually being used. And I think it solves a lot of problems with one solution. Like I mentioned, data drift reduction to at least detect data drift. Now, what you do about it is kind of a different story. And also, you will be exercising like any public-facing APIs. That if you're going to be using ChatGPT, the public API of that, you should have something that's running continuously to make sure that nothing on the ChatGPT side changes that will break your application, and this could be a way to do it. So anyway, from like a software engineer's mindset, like I think this one concept kind of could solve quite a few problems. It needs to obviously have validation of these things before we really use this, but I think as the underlying foundation models improve, that this concept could become a reality. I don't know. Any thoughts there, Harvey? Does this terrify you to have generated examples, generated notes, generated patient encounters, and then have AI like grade those encounters to impressions, and then have yet another AI compare those impressions to like a device output? Does this sound crazy to you, or do you think are we almost there, or what?
No, I love this point. This is a science that's evolving. A couple of years ago, we were shocked that it could even summarize, but then we realized, wait, this thing is hallucinating, and wait, it's probably maybe causing more work than it's worth. But now we have different technologies, let's call them agents, that can check on each other's work, and now you can have multiple tasks that create the better output. And that makes me excited because now we're actually getting to that point where it's actually doing way more than we wanted, and that's a good thing, and it's doing it more accurately. So yes, it's terrifying that it's hallucinating. Yes, it's this balance. And so I know we only have a few minutes, but I want to say it's this dependency on technology that worries me. Even though I'm known as Dr. GPT and I use every AI tool in the world, I feel that my 20 years of clinical gestalt plus I can make that balance and I can make that call. And I know when it's hallucinating, when it's doing things. But my worry is the newer generations, no disrespect to the new doctors or the new medical students, they don't have the 20 years of clinical gestalt, that understanding. And I worry that they're going to start looking at these tools as the gold standard, as, oh no, ChatGPT said it, it has to be right. And they don't have anything to they make that basic understanding from. And so I
Mm-hmm.
caution to use how to use this.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. This is something that I see in all practice as kind of my software engineering side, is that the senior engineers can use ChatGPT, can use these technologies more effectively currently because they have that gestalt to be able to correct for issues. Like it seems like it's not really going to fill in any knowledge gap. It's going to more amplify the person that you already are today, not necessarily make you significantly better. And that's something that I also worry about as well. Like you also I also worry about my son too. Like are they going to grow up in an age where ChatGPT is just the gold standard, like you said? Because humans still need to probably learn this stuff, right, in order to know if it's true or not. At least be there to train these systems. Do you feel that, like, recently in your experience, that like the level of hallucinations has gone down to a point where like you feel more comfortable putting that in front of like a trainee, or are you still kind of thinking, or I guess, yeah, kind of what's your level of comfort there?
Yeah, I think it's the answer's the answer's I don't want to sound like a politician, but like yes and no, depending on what it is that I'm doing. Case in point, if I am teaching a medical student, let's just say they're in the third, fourth year, and I'm teaching them repetition of different ways that diabetes present, and I'm using a RAG model that
Hmm.
has been built on that particular database. Let's just call it a couple of textbooks that are the standard of that are known as the standard of care for this information. I feel fine using that as a tool to teach the student so that they can see the different variations. And I'm not terribly worried that it's going to hallucinate to something wrong, because it's teaching them just different variations of the same question and making them better at problem solving. And I think that use is really good because as a lifetime of seeing patients, it's nice to be able to see different ways of how they present and just starting molding the brain of learning that pattern recognition.
Certainly, yeah. And how about like direct to patient use? Yeah, any thoughts on the state of the art right now? Because we know it's happening, right? Like we can't really stop patients
Yeah.
from like using these tools. And like
Yeah,
perhaps that
that's
should be the first realm that gets some amount of pushback from FDA, perhaps, like that seems like that probably is the most risky to me. Like if we're having a conversation about we're worried about like a junior physician using ChatGPT, I think direct to patient should be even more terrifying.
yeah, let's speak to that. So when I speak to doctors and healthcare facilities, I'm not worried about them because they have a license to
Mhm.
practice medicine, and the
Yeah.
state legislation has gone through, and they have enough background and training that to some extent they should, in my opinion, know better than to just cut and paste whatever ChatGPT says. They should have at least more of an understanding from an ethical point of view and logic to say that's probably not good practice. With that said,
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm more worried about patients that when Google happened, I remember going through as a medical student, and my attending was upset with Google because they're like, man, people show up with Google papers, But now I'm more worried about ChatGPT because it sounds so convincing. It sounds so correct. Doesn't sound like it's hallucinating. And for the average untrained physician or healthcare person out there that didn't go to med school, doesn't have years of healthcare experience, they will believe what they read. Whereas if they see it's an ad or they see this thing sounds so convincing, but that comes from ChatGPT. Please keep a doctor in the loop, and not just any doctor, the right doctor. Meaning, if you're looking up something about surgery, then run that by a surgeon or someone in that space that knows that information, so that so they can verify it.
Yeah, that is definitely sage advice. Hopefully, one that is currently being taken. What really terrifies me a lot is this: like, there's going to be a patient who doesn't go to the ER because of something that ChatGPT said, and someone is going to get hurt. That's certainly the risk that I worry about a lot. At the same time, though, like, what is better? Is it better to wait to go and speak to a burned out physician that has 20 other patients on their list today, or ask ChatGPT something about a minor medical condition? I don't know if there's any studies or anything done on that, or kind of what the sentiment is, or how much the sentiment is changing. But I think that could be a topic for another day. Anyway, yeah, we're at time, and I'd love to thank. I just want to thank Dr. Harvey Castro for all the insightful comments and also participation. I'll kind of maybe leave with this final graphic that I really found interesting. This was from Dr. Keith Dreyer, and it kind of shows what's currently going on right now. So the regulation of Gen AI in healthcare, the current pathways that are available, does feel like pushing a square peg through a round hole. Currently, what's going on is it's all going unregulated for now. And unfortunately, this is where all of it's going into. Like, you have, if you're a Gen AI application, it's probably going to go to the consumer AI route for the time being. And we see from the meetings we have at the FDA, they're currently working on it, but it's still not really clear how these are going to be done. And my hope and message for everyone is just please be careful, please be ethical, please definitely continue to push the field forward, but do so in a reasonable way. Unfortunately, there's a lot of devices or a lot of software that's just going out that way because everyone else is doing it. That definitely worries me. But anyway, these will be talks for another day. Yeah, Harvey, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I always like ending it with, at the end of the day, it takes a village. So let's all work together and learn from each other. And whatever knowledge you got from today, share it at your institute, share it with your colleagues, because collectively we're all learning in this inexact science. And then the last thing I want to say is thank you for having me. It's an honor, and let's do this again. Because I feel like you have a lot more information, and I'd love to participate with you.
Yep, sounds good. All right. Thanks a lot, Harvey. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right, sir. Have a good one. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good one. Bye.